Wonder if you can hear me? Yes, the microphone is working. So, thank you very much for coming early in the morning. It's not the usual time that at ISPI we hold our conferences. We are very glad today to host this conference on Korea. And since we are doing this in Milan, I think that it would be important to also ask ourselves, why are we talking about Korea, the Korean Peninsula, which from Italy looks quite far away. But let's think twice. Just a few years ago, also when we talked about Ukraine, it looked like a very far country. Then a guy, Mr. Putin, just reminded us that Ukraine was not so far and that security matters. Probably you remember the rhetoric of the European Union when we used to say that, and we were very proud to say that the European Union was a soft power. We don't need security, we don't need a European army, because we don't need to be an hard power. Then Mr. Putin reminded us that hard power, unfortunately, matters, and we are not ready. So security is back, definitely. Mr. Putin reminded all of us that is back, but also what's going on at our doors in Israel is a reminder, a very sad reminder that unfortunately security is back. And it's back also in countries which apparently are far from us, including Korea. So what happens in Korea and the Korean Peninsula matters to all of us. And what is happening in the Korean Peninsula today matters basically for two reasons. One, before there is North Korea, which is getting more and more assertive, which is provoking, also making nuclear provocations, which is, of course, something we all should be preoccupied of. And also because, very much related to this, North Korea is expanding its outreach to its traditional allies. They have not so many allies, actually, but they have close relationship with Russia and with China. So it means, a traditional power, Russia, and the emerging power, which is China. So these two aspects, the interrelations between South and North Korea, and of course the regional and international impact of these provocations by Kim Jong-un, will be the two issues that we are going to cover in today's conference this morning. I'm very glad that ISPI is keeping cooperating actually with the Consulate General of South Korea. It's a long-standing relations and cooperation that we have. I think also dating back to 2014. So it's almost a 10-year, we celebrated a 10-year anniversary of our relations. So without further ado, because we have a lot of outstanding speakers also coming from Korea and Asia, I now leave the floor. I'm very glad and honored to leave the floor to the Consul General of South Korea, Kang Hyung-Shik. Please, Consul General.
Buongiorno. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. 안녕하십니까? 오늘도 우리 한국 분들도 많이 참석하시는데 우리 상신 실장님, 또 황충현 회장님, 또 우리 교민분들도 오시는데 정말 감사드립니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very delighted and then the honors to host international conference titled "The Koreas in the Age of Uncertainty: What's Next?" in close partnership with the ISPI, one of the leading and prestigious institute in the field of international politics, not only in Italy, but also in the European countries. First of all, I'd like to extend the heartfelt appreciations to Mr. Antonio Villafranca, Director of ISPI, and all the ISPI faculty members, the great contributions to successful coordination. It's wonderful the conference. Also, I'd like to express the gratitude to all the panelists who attended out of their busy schedules, and as well as everyone who attended today's conference with a big interest about the Korea. Over the past few years, the relations between the Korea and Italy is developing very smoothly across all the sectors, including the politics, economic and culture, the tourism, etc. Back in 2018, the bilateral ties was upgraded to strategic partnerships, and this next year will hold special significance as it marks the 140th years of anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and Italy. And then during 2 weeks ago, during the President Sergio Mattarella's state visit to Korea, both leaders agreed to strengthen cooperations in many areas, such as the aerospace, the industry, artificial intelligence, and other areas. And then both leaders declare the next year, 2024, and then 2025 as the year of a mutual visit. Also, the President Mattarella extended invitations to South Korean presidents to visit Italy sometime next year. After World War II and the Korean War, Korea has developed one of the 10th largest economy and exemplary democratic nations. This progress has been achieved through consistent investment in education, R&D, innovations, and expanded cooperations with international communities. Currently, Korea is transforming into a significant cultural powerhouse by enhancing its soft powers. And Korea announced its Indo-Pacific strategies in December 2022, aiming to become global pivotal state through increasing its responsibilities, contributions to peace and stability in the world. In addition, Korea is now striving to host 2030's Busan World Expo in order to share its successive development stories with the international communities. However, the situation in Korean Peninsula is indeed marked by numerous elements of uncertainties. After the Korean War, Korea still remains in a state of armistice with persistent provocations from North Korea. The advancement of North Korea's nuclear weapons, ballistic missile capabilities pose significant threats to global peace and stability beyond the Korean Peninsula. President Mattarella, during his visit to Korea this month, visited the demilitarized zone, witnessed tense confrontations between North and South Korea. In May 2022, South Korea announced audacious initiative to provide large-scale economic support if North Korea takes practical steps toward denuclearization and proposed unconditional dialogue, but it is unfortunate North Korea does not respond yet. Moreover, the visit of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to Russia in September of this year and the illegal arms trade between North Korea and Russia are further worsening unstable international situations as a result of the war in Ukraine and the Middle East. Korean government is now working in close collaborations with partner countries such as United States, Japan, and European countries, including Italy, for peaceful resolution of North Korean nuclear issues and for establishing permanent peace regimes on the Korean Peninsula. The leader of South Korea, United States, and Japan agreed to strengthen trilateral cooperations for strong response to threats from North Korea at Camp David summit held in Washington in August this year. In addition, South Korean president attended NATO summit held in Lithuania in July this year, following his participations in the summit last year. Furthermore, in November 2022, South Korea established NATO representative office to expand security cooperations between Korea and NATO. Given these current circumstances, I think hosting seminar on Korean Peninsula today is very timely. I hope that this conference will foster constructive and insightful discussions aimed at improving the situations on Korean Peninsula. In bringing my remarks conclusions, I wish that today's conference will deepen understanding and interest regarding the situations on the Korean Peninsula. And this will provide opportunity to enhance bonds of friendship, cooperations between Korea and Italy in future. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Okay, Vado. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you, Consul, for your introduction. Also, Antonio, of course, for kicking us off here. And again, Antonio's right. This is not the first time we are collaborating with the Korean Consulate and with the Korean government. I think it's conference number 5 together. It was, of course, a bit of an interruption during the pandemic, but very happy to do this again. And of course, we always talk about the Korean Peninsula and North Korea, and because the problem is not going away. So we'll looking forward to doing this again next year, maybe. Maybe under different circumstances, but certainly, very, very topical. So thank you very much for your support in all of this. But also thank you very much, very briefly, and that cannot be mentioned often enough to our ISPI colleagues who are organizing this conference, Antonella Lilly and Ilaria and her team, who are setting up this conference and making this possible, because putting all of you in one room at the same time with all the PowerPoints, with all the invitations, with all the flight tickets is always a lot of work. So we're very happy to be doing this again. Without further ado, I'll come back a little later into the discussion. We have a very, very good first panel. We also have a very, very, very good second panel, with also some female participation. So do not worry, this is an all-male panel, but this is about to change. Not for now. We have an hour roughly, an hour 5 minutes roughly for our 3 speakers. We have Antonio Fiori, my colleague from the University of Bologna, together with Francesca, Italy's top Korea scholar, I think it's fair to say. Next to me is our colleague from the Korea Institute for National Unification, Sang-Shin Lee. Very welcome to Italy to you as well. You have a PowerPoint, and this will be uploaded in a second. And last, but certainly not least, very famous or infamous John Delury from Yonsei University in Seoul, who's currently based in Rome for a year. So we took advantage of his presence here in Italy to get him to the panel. We have lots of topics. Antonio will kick us off. You have 8 to 10 minutes. Would ask you to stick to the time. Nobody ever sticks to the time. I know that, but I'll have to say this, and I hope really that you will stick to the time, 8 minutes. And I'll of course interrupt you if you don't. All right, Antonio, the floor is yours. Again, very welcome to all of you, and looking forward to a very fruitful discussion. Antonio.
Thank you. I will not stick to the time, but actually Axel knows me well, so I'm sure he will forgive me. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to ISPI, to Professor Berkofsky, above all to Consul Kang and the Consulate of Milan. Actually, just because I want to be loved by Koreans, I will talk about what is not working in the South Korean administration, at least from my point of view. And actually, what I will be looking at is President Yoon, so the current administration, so-called audacious initiative, which has already been mentioned by the Consul General, and then I will also try to look at the national security strategy that has been implemented recently, or relatively recently, by the South Korean administration. First of all, after 100 days, roughly, after his inauguration, President Yoon started, actually, he announced this kind of bold plan, which is also known as the audacious initiative, to restart the peace process with North Korea. specifics, actually, I must say, or at least from my point of view, specifics were very vague. And the key bargain that actually Yoon Suk-yeol offered was to provide North Korea with extensive investment and aid in return for an agreement on denuclearization. And in particular, he talked about 6 proposals for cooperation on everything, basically everything, from food assistance to modernizing ports in North Korea. From my point of view, actually, and I need to be very clear here, this kind of bold plan is just another containment strategy, something that actually has been continuously applied by conservative governments in Korea, and only the name changes, basically. Superficially, this approach involves the prospect of the South Korean engaging more deeply with the North, but actually taken on their own, each of the 6 proposals I was mentioning addresses issues which, in my view, could indeed be usefully exploited for building sustainable inter-Korean cooperation. The problem is that Hyun has chosen to leverage these offers of support and technology transfer in return for North Korean commitment to a phased process of denuclearization backed up by inspection. So something that actually we had already witnessed, let's say, 25 years ago. And of course, this has been all rejected by the North Korean regime. Again and again, in my opinion, it seems like the traditional, actually, grand gesture of support that are announced and made contingent upon the North agreeing to an impossible red line of denuclearization. But this has become quite, a tradition for conservative presidents, making overtures to the North that actually are more about being seen to be engaging, while banking on a hostile rejection to absolve them from having to put forth a genuine reconciliation plan. That's actually my position. And another point I have been talking about for the last 25 years is that I do firmly believe that actually denuclearization must be the last step of a road towards full peace and reunification, not the prerequisite. This must be understood. But I also tend to think that by starting from denuclearization, what conservative governments, and specifically what Hyun is doing in South Korea, is damaging inter-Korean relations and stagnating a possible peace process in the peninsula. In addition to that, the impact on the South's standing in Pyongyang will be further eroded, and Seoul will continue to sit on the sidelines as the North, especially at this time, it has been highlighted, increasingly looks to China and Russia for support with development projects over inter-Korean cooperation. And this is a significant problem for South Korean leaders, because they tend to be absolutely marginalized in this kind of development. And then, on June the 7th, 2023, the Office of National Security of the Republic of Korea published the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's national security strategy, which has a subtitle that is Global Pivotal State for Freedom, Peace and Prosperity. Honestly speaking, I could not really understand what was the meaning of these subtitles, since I do not find any of these commitments in the national security strategy that has been published. But in any case, actually, the document presents, the overarching principles, objectives, and directions of South Korea's diplomatic and security policies. following the publication of these national security strategy, following the publication of the first national security strategy document, which was published in 2004 under the Nomuyen's administration, this is the 5th national security strategy document for South Korea. And the document states that the current South Korean administration wants to, and I quote, foster a sustainable peace, end quoting, on the Korean Peninsula. And in order to achieve these, 3 main objectives are contemplated. The first one is enhancing the safety of South Korean citizens. The second one is establishing peace on the peninsula and preparing for future unification. This is basically a legend. But the third one is laying the foundation for East Asia's prosperity. These goals are actually, in my opinion, and not only in my opinion, are worth striving for. But actually what I'm criticizing is the method that is proposed by the Yoon government that, for sure, will not be working. You know, if you read the document, what you find is that the document itself argues, and again I'm quoting, real peace is only possible when supported by strong security. And this is a mistake. In my view, this is probably the worst mistake that actually the Yoon administration is eventually doing. And you know, when it specifically talks about inter-Korean relations, you know, of course, in the document you find, the necessity to establish mutual respect and trust, the necessity to pursue dialogue with North Korea, quoting, without preconditions, maintaining a flexible and open stance. Few details are actually provided in, on how to achieve such progress. Instead, the Yoon government strategy is centered on approaches that, as I said, have been already tried and which failed in the past. They have failed. So I don't see any necessity to, take them again into account. This way of thinking has not worked for decades. The international community has expected North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons program in response to external pressure. That is what we do. That is what the international community does. Sanctions, deterrence, to no avail. What we have now is actually a stronger North Korea, not a weaker North Korea. I can tell you something. When I arrived for the first time in 1997 in South Korea, actually the Kim Jong-sam government was particularly sure of the fact that North Korea was like a plane that was going to crash soon. That was 1997. We are in the same situation with a stronger North Korea in 2023. This must mean something. On top of that, 2 minutes. 2. While the 3 principles for denuclearization negotiations mentioned in the national security strategy are deterrence, dissuasion, and dialogue, there are no specificities at all when actually, the document needs to talk about how to realize the 3rd principle. And so coming, to my conclusions, actually. In conclusion, basically the cover page of this document refers to South Korea as a global pivotal state for freedom, peace, and prosperity. For these, actually, to become a reality, in my opinion, cooperation with various actors is absolutely necessary to resume diplomacy with North Korea and to contribute to the region's stability. Otherwise, actually, again, we are leaving North Korea actually in the hands of China and Russia. And this is unacceptable, and this is dangerous. Strategies are needed. New strategies are needed to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. These should not include unilateral denuclearization demands more sanctions, prolonged military drills with the US and Japan, or responding aggressively to any of the North Korean military provocation. Actually, what I think is that the Yoon government must build trust with Pyongyang through its actions, through South Korea's actions. And this includes being more proactive in resuming inter-Korean exchanges, promoting dialogue between the US and North Korea, shifting away from denuclearization towards arms control measures, and laying out a roadmap to end the Korean War, something the previous administration was working on. Actions which have not taken any shape yet. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Axel.
There you go. Wow. Okay. Wow. This is 12 very explosive, very open, and straightforward 12 minutes. But this is good. You know, this is certainly lots of food for thought. You know, we are among scholars, we are among friends, we are among allies. So there's lots to talk about. So the basic message is, you know, engagement instead of containment, which is pushing, you know, pushing North Korea, as Antonio put it, into the hands of China and North Korea. So, you know, lots of food for thought. I'm looking forward to that sort of discussion later on. Very good. Mr. Lee, over to you. Dr. Lee, over to you. The floor is yours, 10, 12 minutes. I cannot give you less because Antonio has ruined it already. You have a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
And the floor is yours. And again, very welcome to Italy and to ISPI.
Thank you. 10 minutes. I will stick to that because you told me that 12 times. My name is Sang-Shin. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. I work for the Korea Institute for National Unification, which is the government institute. That is, our job is to study North Korea and unification, which means that if two Koreas ever come to unification, there is a good chance for me to lose my job. So, as long as we are divided, my job is secure.
That's the only one.
Okay, Antonio already told us about the audacious initiative, but he kind of put me into a defensive position for the audacious initiative. So I'll just explain what audacious initiative is. There are several keywords for the audacious initiative: 3 Ks or kill chain, and 3 Ds and audacious. Let me talk with the kill chain first. First of all, just like Antonio told, the audacious initiative based on the assumption that peace requires very strong military power, and by strong military power, we have 3 plans to defend South Korea from North Korean nuclear weapons and North Korean conventional weapons. First, kill chain. We will destroy North Korean nuclear weapons and missiles before they launch. And that's kill chain. And if we miss some of the North Korean missiles, we will destroy them in the air. That's KAMD. If we fail to protect South Korea from North Korean attack, we will massively retaliate. That's KMPL. That's short for Korean Massive Punishment and Retaliation. So that's the base of the audacious initiative of the Yoon government. So South Korea can defend itself from the North Korean attack. 3 Ds. We have 3 Ds: deterrence, dissuasion, and dialogue. So there are several things which is very distinctive about audacious initiative. One of them is that Yoon government put dissuasion and dialogue in the same formula. A former progressive government tends to focus on dialogue between 2 Koreas, and the conservative government always focus on the coercive diplomacy. But according to the audacious initiative logic, they can work together. Coercive diplomacy will create an environment for the North Korea have to come to the negotiation table. Then we will start dialogue. That's the logic of audacious initiative. So audacious initiatives personally, I don't love the title. It sounds very pretentious. Sounds almost North Korean, but that's my personal opinion. Audacious initiative. First phase, if North Korea genuinely returns to the negotiations for denuclearization, South Korea will give them any aid they want, just like Antonio said. Second, we not only the economic and food security will provide to North Korea, we will also provide North Korea with political and military provide. North Korea is always worried about the regime security. That they always claim that America and South Korea is threatening to invade North Korea. South Korea promised that if North Korea returns to the negotiation table, we will do something to secure North Korea from any attack from maybe America or even China. So that's how audacious initiative is different from former government the plan for the North Korea. And let's skip to this part. Let's compare audacious initiative with the previous government's a bit similar plan for the North Korea. Past efforts, especially by the Lee Myung-bak government, says that Lee Myung-bak government's plan emphasized economic support for North Korea, not just economic, not political or military support. The audacious plan mentioned that if North Korea returns to the negotiation table, we will make sure that North Korea is safe from the outside attack. Second, the former plan provide incentive to the North Korea and hopes that they will respond. So we will just dangle the carrot and wait for North Korea to respond. Kind of passive plan, right? And audacious initiative says that not only we wait for the North Korea to return, we will make North Korea to return by creating kind of coercive environment for the North Korea, meaning sanctions and all sorts of pressure we can do to North Korea. And most importantly, the informal effort, North Korea must first implement denuclearization measures before we start talking. So that the Lee Myung-bak's plan was that if North Korea started dismantling their nuclear weapons, then we will talk. Audacious plan says that North Korea doesn't have to start destroying their nuclear warhead. North Korea just promised that genuinely returns to negotiation table for denuclearization without starting dismantling their nuclear warheads. That's the only condition we have. So that's why we call it audacious plan, audacious initiative. Personally, I think the genuinely part is kind of problematic. We have to provide the specific standard or specific the conditions, what genuinely means. Okay? Without that, North Korea will have to make themselves subject to South Korean scrutiny. I don't think North Korea will accept that without the specific definition of what genuinely means. Of course, North Korea soundly rejected the idea, which was expected, and they master the artistry of insult. I'm always fascinated by their capability of finding new ways to insult South Korea, and I think it's very funny. I hope you read those Kim Il-jung's statement. Anyway, it was expected because North Korean regime is not very concerned about the food security of their people. Always their first priority is the security of Kim's family's regime. So as long as Kim is secure, they don't care about the food or the medicine or the COVID-19. So, and the nuclear weapon is part of North Korean pride and identity. So that was the sound rejection of North Korea was kind of expected. And okay, time is almost running out. yes. So the next step we will have to do is not just wait. We will have to, just like the dissuasion part of the audacious initiative means, we will have to create an environment, which is also the problem. To pressure North Korea, we will need help from Russia and China. And we don't see any that Russia or China is helping South Korea to pressure North Korea anytime soon. So the weak point of audacious initiative is that we are handing over North Korean issues to the mercy of China and Russia. So we are waiting for China and Russia to solve our problems. I don't see the wisdom of that kind of waiting, and I don't know. I have some conferences before I come to Milan in DC and Chicago, and the American experts on Korean issues. They seem to losing interest in North Korean denuclearization. They are already talking about arms control and arms reduction with North Korea, which is not a good news to South Korea. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. And just one second before handing over to Professor Delury, to John. Audacious means bold, taking risk, and what we see. I mean, and this is what, of course, Antonio put so eloquently and so forcefully, but also you in a way saying, yes, this is that really yet audacious? Is that really a bold risk? To somehow count also on China and Russia to help, and then pursue the old strategy of urging North Korea to denuclearize first before coming to the negotiation table, or let's put it this way, let's be positive, let's be forward-looking. Or could be audacious also be complemented by something a bit more audacious that goes beyond this familiar approach. That is, of course, understandable from a South Korean perspective, because it's good to ask somebody to denuclearize and hope that it will. But of course, North Korea. I suppose, and this is something we'll be discussing, I think, denuclearization, as far as North Korea is concerned, is probably the last item of its political agenda. If I were North Korea, I wouldn't do it, because, this is, the only bargaining tool I have, at least for the time being, unless there's really an audacious, fundamentally changing approach from the others. But then, of course, it always needs two to tango. So the ball is as much in North Korea's court as it is in anybody else's court. John, can you kick us off with your speech? And last but not least, John Delury, looking forward to hearing your intervention on relations between North Korea and the US and China. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Axel. Let's see if I can gain some time for the group by going under. I find myself strangely in the sort of easier role of explaining and critiquing North Korean strategy. So shift the focus a little bit away from South Korea and the Yoon administration and think about North Korea and Kim Jong-un. Now, obviously, we have much more limited sources of solid information, and you have to use a lot more sort of inference and hypothesis. So what I say is certainly up for debate in the panel and with the audience, and I certainly invite that. But what I'm going to try to do, what I usually try to do, in thinking through Korean security questions and inter-Korean relations and US-DPRK relations, is to put myself, if not in the head of Kim Jong-un, maybe an advisor to Kim Jong-un, sort of like Axel was just saying, like, what are persuasive arguments you can make within the North Korean system, given its logic? Because if we are ultimately trying to persuade or dissuade them from anything, we have to at least begin by trying to understand their priorities and the environment they perceive and in which they operate. So I'll try to make a few fairly clear points about how I see Kim Jong-un and where he is in his sort of reign, and I think we can call it a reign. And I would start with something, I think a point maybe Axel just made, I'm not sure we'll disagree as a panel on this, which is if you try to distill what is the central strategic priority for Kim Jong-un, I would say it's autonomy. Others might choose more loaded terms for it, but I think it's basically autonomy. There's a classic old article in our field by B.C. Choe about the quest for autonomy from the 1960s. And if you go back and read that, much of it still rings true. And indeed, if you sort of measure Kim Jong-un, I mean, he's a dynast, you know, he is a king, basically. He's a de facto king. And if you measure him by his father and grandfather, I think it actually helps to understand a deeper logic in the North Korean state in terms of prioritizing autonomy over other goals. That doesn't mean that other goals don't exist. And even if we stick to fairly standard international relations theory, you know, of the kind that you would hear in a classroom, the fact that Kim Jong-un won't give up his nuclear weapons easily or maybe at all, the fact that that wonderful quote from his sister who would trade their destiny for corn cake, I might disagree, I guess, with my friend Sang-Shin that it means Kim Jong-un doesn't care about corn cake whatsoever, does not care about the North Korean economy. So hopefully we can have some debate there. Because I think there are other priorities, even though autonomy is the top priority. Prestige is certainly a priority. Power, of course, is a priority, national power. But so is, in my view, economic development. And if you Google me and Kim Jong-un's name, you can find plenty of writings where I've made that argument over the years. And I'm sticking with that argument in terms of using his own public statements as well as in different periods of his sort of reign. Kim Jong-un, one way in which he's at least different from his father, maybe not as different from his grandfather, where, in my view, he's made serious efforts to move economic development up the ladder of priorities. He did that early on when he famously said, "You won't have to tighten your belt under my regime," which is in some tension with what his sister said about corn cake. And then we saw it was brief, but we saw it actually quite strikingly amidst the last round of serious diplomacy with North Korea in 2018, where Kim Jong-un came out in April and announced a new strategic line of putting all efforts on economic development. Now, that was in the context of security agreements. That was in the context of not just Moon Jae-in wanting dialogue and peaceful coexistence, but of course Donald Trump wanting, signaling that he was ready to change US-DPRK relations. In that very unusual context, where the environment, I would say, really did change, the kinds of choices that were available to Kim Jong-un were suddenly quite dramatically different, he announced a new strategic line of bumping development, bumping the economy up the ladder of priorities. So we can come back to that. I'll come back to that in conclusion to say that's basically the only hopeful thing I see out there. But I don't want to overstate the argument. You know, that is in tension with these other priorities, and he's not going to risk autonomy for development. A second point I would make about Kim Jong-un, I'll be briefer here, is that this is almost more, I guess, tactical or sort of stylistic, a way in which, again, he's quite different from his father, less different from his grandfather, but it's strange to say he's more transparent. I think there's less deception in general in terms of how he conducts himself. Propaganda is much more sort of blunt. His sister takes this to the nth degree in a way that Sang-Shin talked about. But for example, if you look at failures, you know, failed satellite tests or missile tests, from early on, Kim Jong-un sort of surprised people because he didn't try and hide it and gaslight his public into thinking that it didn't happen or that it was successful. He had the propaganda organs openly admit that the first satellite failed, and there have been other important instances where he's admitted failure. And again, coming back to the issue of economics, Kim Jong-un talks a lot about the economy domestically. We don't pay a lot of attention because we don't really care about the North Korean economy, but he talks a lot about it, and he doesn't go out and say, "Oh, the economy's great, aren't you guys happy?" He does some of that, but he also gives public speeches that are widely publicized in which he says, our economy is not good. I know it's not good, and here's why it's not good, but I haven't given up on improving it. So in that sense, I think it's strangely a more transparent regime, and there might be something in there to pay attention to. And then the third point, again, that's a little bit, certainly very different between him and his father, and the late period of his grandfather is different, is his time horizon. I always emphasize the importance of thinking about, again, almost putting yourself in the court of Kim Jong-un and the time horizon of this man. Also, as we look back and try to understand his decisions so far, of course, he took power when he was quite young, basically the youngest head of state in the world. With a almost limitless time horizon. You know, when you're that young, you don't think, well, I might die when I'm 60 or 70. You basically think there's no limit to how long you have. And in terms of his political system, and we've seen one of the strangest and most interesting, notable things is how he's bringing his daughter, bring your daughter to work day in the North Korean context. But that's a reminder to all of us that it's essentially or presumably a dynastic succession. And so even this now getting toward middle-aged man, he'll be turning 40, I guess, depending on which birth date we believe soon. He's not really quite young anymore. He's also not old. And his time horizon is much longer even than Vladimir Putin, than Xi Jinping. Certainly it's longer than Presidents Yoon and Biden. Because it not only extends over the course of his own, what he thinks, how long he thinks he'll live, but also probably into the next generation. So in a way, he's not in the same kind of hurry. And I'll try to bring that in particular back to some comments on South Korea and the United States. If I have some of this reconstruction of Kim Jong-un's strategic priorities right and almost his style right, then I'll revisit this question we're talking about inter-Korean relations and where does South Korea fit in. You know, I think if you're Kim Jong-un and you're looking south, what do you see? What does he see? I think he sees a South Korea that's not really a threat. I think we get that wrong, but also not an opportunity. I think I agree with the general view of the panel. There's nothing particularly tempting in the audacious initiative if you're Kim Jong-un. It's sort of unfriendly. South Korea is basically unfriendly to North Korea. But also, and we haven't really gotten into this, and I know Sang-Shin knows a lot and does a lot of survey research on this, so hopefully we can lure him out. It depends on who you talk to, and it depends particularly on the demographics of your South Korean audience. But a big part of the South Korean public is uninterested in this conference, uninterested in North Korea. I've taught in South Korea for 13 years, so while I don't have the survey research that Sang-Shin has, I have a certain amount of empirical experience with this very important feature of South Korea, and I think it's well understood in North Korea. So that's where the Yoon administration is interesting, and I'll have a slightly different take maybe, if nothing else, just to keep this a lively panel. We're talking about some of the lineages of South Korean strategy toward the north, and I want to suggest there are three. There's the progressive approach that's fairly straightforward and pretty clear, linking back to Kim Dae-jung, which puts a huge emphasis on North Korea, basically makes North Korea the central strategic priority of South Korean foreign policy. But then on the conservative side, I think there are actually two varieties of the approach to North Korea, and we can debate this. I think Park Geun-hye was more similar to Roh Tae-woo in that while she certainly didn't share the progressive vision, North Korea was much more important to her administration. And in a sense, she was sort of out of joint with a lot of her public, certainly younger South Koreans. Whereas Yoon fits sort of the third lineage. He's more similar to Lee Myung-bak, and I think he might be more similar to someone who's not always classified as a conservative, Kim Young-sam, who Antonio mentioned, where for various reasons there is a deprioritization of North Korea. There's an attempt to keep North Korea much lower on the ladder of South Korean strategic priorities. And he was quite explicit in that. If you look back at the Foreign Affairs article that was sort of the grand statement or the statement of grand strategy on the part of the Yoon administration, it really pretty explicitly says that a goal is to lower North Korea as a priority. And so in a strange way, I think that we're seeing Kim Jong-un's response to that real strategy of deprioritization, which in a South Korean context, it's not politic to say that too openly. You have to sort of hint at it. But I think, again, North Koreans are pretty sophisticated in their ability to read their counterparts in South Korea. I think Kim Jong-un actually has surprised me in that I think he's sort of reciprocating the deprioritization. Kim Jong-un could exploit a vulnerability that the Yoon administration has, in that Kim Jong-un could gin up a major crisis, much bigger than the stuff we're seeing now, bigger than spy satellite. If there's an incident in the West Sea involving loss of life, involving a young South Korean who dies on a ship, which can basically happen any day of the week. It's not that hard to make that sort of incident happen, and of course they have happened over the years. That's a different kind of problem for the Yoon administration. President Yoon has to respond in a different way, actually, than he has to respond to even an ICBM test. But we haven't seen that. We have not seen what I would describe as a really aggressive Kim Jong-un approach within an inter-Korean context. And I think that's a result of a deliberate decision on the part of Kim Jong-un that he's kind of not interested either. Lastly, I'll turn quickly to the relationship with the United States because it sort of mirrors this lack of interest on the part of Kim Jong-un. It's very possible that if the status quo keeps up as it is, and I would say that's likely, Joe Biden will complete a presidential term and there will have been no talks between Pyongyang and Washington. Now you might think, oh, of course, I mean, it's always hard for Pyongyang and Washington to talk. Well, actually, every presidential term since the end of the Cold War, they've talked. They both see some reason they want to talk or need to talk. They explore what can be done, or there's a crisis where they feel they can't not talk, they talk. So this will actually be something unprecedented. And it will reflect certainly on the deprioritization of North Korea for the Biden administration, which is, I hardly have to make that argument, that's pretty obvious, and we heard it from Sang-Shin, it's pervaded the expert community as well. But also the deprioritization of the United States and diplomacy with the United States from Kim Jong-un's perspective. So in a strange way, I guess I try to be optimistic. There's a certain collusion of these three principal players, Pyongyang, Seoul, and Washington, where they're all sort of okay with this status quo, in which, despite what they may say and certain talking points that they're paying attention, in fact, they've really deprioritized the relationship amongst one another. So I had more to say, but I see Axel getting uncomfortable, and the other panelists have hogged so much time that I will yield the mic. And thank you. And let me thank again the host for inviting me and the consul as well for this great discussion.
Thanks a lot, John. Okay. Now, thank you very much, John, for this insightful view and opinions. You know, we have 50 minutes, so I think we're in a good place. Before I get back to our panelists, because I want them to talk to each other a little bit to address the points. We have time for two questions from the audience. Number one, very brief, and another question. Okay, so let's go with this one question. Be very brief, and then please, let us know who you are addressing the question to.
Thank you very much. As a political geographer, I saw that in geopolitical dynamics, autonomy, prestige, national honor, and so on is very strong. Don't you think that maybe to have a progressive relation and starting dialogue, the first official declaration from South Korea and the West is to say, okay, we accept in the future there are two Koreas, and to give up with the reunification of the state, of the political reunification?
Okay. John, you want to get back to this very, very quickly, and also Sang-Shin for maybe, because after all, you are from South Korea. Yeah.
I want Sang-Shin to go first. He is, after all, from South Korea.
That's a good idea, yeah. Okay.
Unification is in our constitution. Our government is supposed to pursue unification. So, however, people think we cannot give up the dream of unification officially.
Very, very clear.
Can I add something very controversially that maybe a South Korean wouldn't say?
Okay.
Constitutions change, and this, this problem is not going away. So I think that for now it is kind of unrealistic, basically. But again, generationally, the future could look very, very different. I mean, 20, 30 years from now, I think we may be having a panel more on those terms, because there may be, in South Korea and potentially even in North Korea, a very different mindset where it's like, look, we need to sort of acknowledge that reality. We talk about, can we acknowledge the reality that North Korea has nuclear weapons? You're asking a further question, can we acknowledge the reality there are two Koreas? But basically, South Korea is not ready, as you heard. But younger people?
North Korea and South Korea has very different definition of unification. In North Korean version, unification is forming a federation between two Koreas. South Korea, we want to form a unitary system, the same government, same people, same political system. But as John said, the public opinion in South Korea is rapidly changing. The majority of South Korean public is ready to accept a new definition of unification. Maybe the EU style of the coexistence of two Korea might be acceptable to the Korean public. But as I said, unification is in our constitution. As my salary is from the tax money, so I cannot say that unification is not possible. But you know what I meant.
I just want to remind you, I'm from Germany, and in 1988, nobody spoke about reunification or unification. It was really off the agenda, and then it happened all of a sudden. But because the other side was collapsing economically, and that's probably different in the North Korean case. Antonio, over to you. You got 1 minute to address the points that were
there's something actually Sang-Shin is not revealing, and there is something he should tell you. That is, just because he knows well what is happening in Korea nowadays, right? I mean, talking about reunification or unification, that's the big problem, right? First of all, when actually the Ministry of Unification in South Korea, okay? There's a ministry in South Korea. The Ministry of Unification actually has been totally depotentiated. It has been downgraded. I can't even understand why they're keeping it. Just because, the Ministry of Unification nowadays in South Korea, is not talking, cannot explicitly talk about North Korea and the possibility to achieve a unification. They need to talk about global values, they need to talk about international peace, they need to talk about human rights, very noble kind of issues, beautiful. But actually, we're talking about the Ministry of Unification.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? We have time for one more question. Okay. Panelists, the floor is yours again. What do you want to address? Again, we have some time.
I'd like to introduce some of the forthcoming published by the KINU. Dr. Jung Eun-mi of KINU is preparing a new book on North Korean economy. I read the manuscript of the book, and it is very interesting. It talks about North Korean economy is not as bad as we expected. And one of the reasons why it's not bad is, surprisingly, is climate change. North Korean agricultural productivity is very low because it's cold place and they have hardly arable land. But thanks to the climate change, the agricultural productivity went up. And recently, they officially changed the main crops of North Korea from rice and corn to rice and wheat. Italians eat pasta, Koreans eat rice, so the rice is sacred in Korea. And South Korea always offered North Korea a rice. And somehow, some years ago, they stopped being interested in South Korean rice because they are eating bread. They like to, in North Korea, they prefer bread to rice. And they consume less rice these days, so that's why that is one of the reasons they are not interested in audacious initiative or any other economic aid South Korea willing to provide to North Korea. And the corn is an excellent crop, but one of the problem is that corn requires a lot of fertilizers, which North Korea cannot provide. South Korea used to give a lot of fertilizers to North Korea to assist the corn agriculture. But since they're losing interest in corn and they're shifting their focus to the wheat, I think that's kind of indication that North Korean economy is changing in a good way. Thank you.
If I may intervene, so what is the, what is the realistic, maybe to you also, and maybe also to South Korean, other South Korean participants also, maybe also to John, who lives in South Korea. So what, how realistic do you think is, because we've had, what Antonio lined out throughout his presentation, how realistic is it to think that that North Korea, under the current circumstances, and also against the background of this this new strategy, or new same old familiar strategy, how likely is it that North Korea will sit down at a negotiation table, whatever table it is, in return for, promising to talk about denuclearization? How is that in any way, from a South Korean perspective, part of what North Korea under Kim Jong-un is considering, or is it really, wishful thinking? What do you think?
Well, I'll start. Yeah, wishful thinking. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario. I thought you were starting for inter-Korean talks of some kind, because again, there's a lot more that happens between the two Koreas, or it kind of comes out of nowhere. Even with some of the examples I gave, and some of you will know this well, Lee Myung-bak, which I think was, again, I would say, I'd be curious if Antonio agrees, but I think that's the most similar to the sort of approach of the Yoon administration. But even in the MB days, there were suddenly talks. There were both in the context of crisis. I think that was in one of the incidents along the border. Again, that's kind of when they sort of have to talk and can talk relatively easily. But there were also friendly, North Korea sent envoys for, I think it was the Asian Games, right? Almost out of nowhere. I mean, I remember being in Seoul at the time, and suddenly all the wheels were churning at the Unification Ministry, because it's like, we got to host North Koreans. They're coming to Incheon tomorrow, And this is when things were very bad between the two Koreas, and it wasn't a big strategic priority, certainly not at the public level of the South Korean government at that time to talk to North Korea, but suddenly there they were. And of course, we saw obviously in 2018, very dramatic, profound shift, although then we knew the Moon government wanted it to happen. So I wouldn't preclude the possibility, let's say next year, that because of a kind of crisis on the border or some weird friendly gesture, actually you suddenly see some talks between the two Koreas. But it will not be about denuclearization. And if the Yoon administration tries before to say, wink, wink, nah, nah, this is actually about administration, the talks will be canceled. And if they say afterward, oh, those were about nuclear talks, I almost guarantee you will see Kim Yo-jong come out with some great insult about how we never talked about nuclear weapons at all. They're lying through their teeth, If Kim Jong-un is going to talk to anyone about denuclearization, or not even that, the nuclear issue, that's how you could get talks with the Biden administration, which again, I would say seem unlikely. But nuclear talks with South Korea seems virtually impossible. I hope everyone remembers I said this when it happens, and you can all send outraged emails to ISPI. What kind of experts are you inviting? But that's my prediction.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Antonio, last word.
Last word on this. Well, no, it's not going to happen. That's what I actually think that, as John said, I mean, it's almost impossible actually to get North Korea to the table at this time. Couple of things. First one, I do agree, yes, absolutely. Lee Myung-bak and, this kind of bold plan, basically, in my vision, actually tend to have, the same prerequisites basically starting from more or less the same point, and actually they're getting nowhere. For sure, Vision 3000 actually was absolutely a failure. I think I can say that. The last good chance actually was Hanoi, and that was completely destroyed by Trump. And this must be clearly sad, actually, because, you know, if you read between the lines of what I said, actually, we still have, you know, American governments which are pretty much convinced of the application of this CVID paradigm, that is complete, irreversible, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement. Okay, so all of a sudden, actually, Kim Jong-un should accept to get rid of everything. That not only means nuclear weapons, but you know, basically all the plans North Korea has, and basically everything. Okay, it will take at least 15 years to do this. But actually, what Trump could not accept in Hanoi was this possibility that was given to him. And it's not my job, actually, to tell you if this was acceptable or not, but it seems like, you know, Kim Jong-un at that time offered him to start denuclearizing in exchange for the lifting of 11 sanctions, not all the sanctions, okay? I want to be very clear on these, because actually, up to recent times, nowadays actually Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world, but before Russia, actually North Korea used to be the most sanctioned country in the world. Well, actually, Kim Jong-un, as far as we know, did not go to Hanoi saying, oh, actually, I will try to denuclearize, or I will promise you to start denuclearizing my country only if you lift all the sanctions, all right? No, it was not like that. 11 measures. That's exactly what he asked for. And you know why? Because actually sanctions in North Korea, and again, this must be said very clearly, sanctions in North Korea are not having any kind of effects on the regime. Actually, what they are doing is worsening the life of the North Korean population. And that's why they are absolutely useless and ineffective.
Okay. On this very, very positive note, we will close here. We're going to move away from the podium. Please, but first, before we move on, please join me in applauding our speakers and the audience for this. Don't run away. It's 2 minutes. Andiamo avanti? Sì? Ok, let's go. You can take your seat. Shall we sit down? Velocemente ci sediamo e così possiamo continuare. Senza panico, senza fretta, con calma, però sediamoci. Ok. Good. Ah, ok, benissimo. Good morning to you, Wongi. Ok. Good. Lui ci sente? Va bene, ok. Okay, all right. So again, thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for staying. This session is going to be as interesting as the first session, and hopefully also as controversial. Because this is what we're here. We are scholars. We are putting our opinions, our analysis on the table, and interacting with the policymaking world. So I think it's very, very interesting. And this will be continued. We also have this session. An hour, in 10 minutes. We have 3 speakers. We have Mr. Wongi Choe from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, streaming live from South Korea. We have Francesca Frassineti, whom I mentioned earlier, colleague here from ISPI, and a professor in Venice and in Bologna. And we have, last but really not least, Névine Schepers, from Belgium, but based in Zurich, at the Center for Security Studies in Zurich, Switzerland. Mr. Wongi, the floor is yours. You got 10 minutes, and very, very welcome to our conference. Maybe next time you come in presence here to Milan, because it's really, really nice, and we hope to be welcoming you here in person on the next occasion. But for now, the floor is yours, and over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning from Seoul, Korea. Actually, I wish I could be there. I really enjoyed the first session. Thank you very much for having me today. The organizers asked me to talk about the Korean government's under President Yoon's overall foreign policy orientations, focusing on his Indo-Pacific strategies. So I'm going to talk mainly about Yoon administration's Indo-Pacific strategy. What are the backgrounds? What are the motivations? What are the key elements and challenges? First of all, let me briefly talk about some of the major foreign policy challenges that South Korea is now facing. I like to point out 4 key challenges of South Korea. The first one is the challenges from the geopolitical location. You know that South Korea and Korean Peninsula as well is surrounded by bigger neighbors, Russia, China, Japan, and the United States as the offshore balance, right? So you have what is called the tyranny of geography. If you look at the history of South Korea over the years, we have been dealing with these bigger neighbors, right? In early 20th century, we were invaded and colonized by Japan, and we have been living under the Japanese colonialism for 35 years. So the thousands of interaction with China, right? I mean, we have a lot of invasions and bad feelings, bad experiences of China, right? So now China is rising. China has already risen to a great power, right? I mean, we are just living next door to China. So one of the most fundamental and big question for South Korea is how we can get along with China over the long term. I mean, there are many differences in terms of the political system, values, and strategic orientations between South Korea and China, right? So in that regard, I mean, how to manage a stable and constructive cooperative relations with China is a big challenge for us. Another issue is North Korea, as the panelists discussed in the first session, right? You know that North Korea is now a de facto military power, right? Whereas South Korea is not. And also, a couple of days ago, North Korea successfully launched spy satellite. And because of the intensification of the US-China strategic competition, the strategic value of North Korea is increasing to the eyes of Chinese as well as Russians. So that's one of the main reasons why in UN Security Council, China and Russia have been repeatedly defending North Korea against its missile and nuclear provocations. So dealing with this North Korea, DPRK nuclear threats, challenges, and eventually the reunification is also a big challenge for us. Another is the economic issue, economic prosperity, right? I mean, Korea has been very successful to take the ladder of economic development. Now Korea is one of the 10th largest economy in the world, right? But you know that as a trading nation, Korean economy is heavily dependent upon external trade, and the deterioration of international economic environment these days is posing a serious challenge for us. And the last but not least, the challenge for South Korea in terms of foreign policy is that now as 10th largest economy in the world, I mean, we are facing a greater burden sharing responsibility. As an advanced country in the world, right? Korea needs to take greater responsibility. Should assume greater regional roles and contribute to international peace and prosperity. And this is very challenging task. So May of last year, President Yoon took office, and December last year, his administration announced a new regional strategy called Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy, the strategy for free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. You know that this is presented as Korea's regional strategy toward the Indo-Pacific region, but in fact, this is a Yoon government's kind of the grand strategy. Then why did Yoon administration came up with this new strategy? I think there are at least three important motivations behind this new strategy. The first one is there is a very strong sense of crisis about the existing liberal international order. You know, South Korea was a kind of a devastated poor country right after the Korean War. I mean, one of the main reasons why we were able to economically take off and become the 10th largest economy in the world is because of the existing international order, the free trade system, the multilateral system. So South Korea, you could say, is one of the largest beneficiary of the existing international order, but which is in great crisis. So we feel a very heightened sense of crisis from the erosion of the existing international order, and we should do something. We feel that we should do something about this. I think this is one of the primary motivations behind the strategic reorientation and strategic awakening of the South Korean government. Another issue is that, I mean, South Korean foreign policy has been kind of transformed quite a lot. I mean, the dominant perception of about our identity in the world used to be that we were just a developing country. That the priority we should care about is our economic development and the inter-Korean issues, right? But as a 10th largest economy, now we are not anymore defining ourselves as developing country. We are developed country, right? So we have greater level of national confidence, right? So in this sense, that with this new Indo-Pacific strategy, we are willing and ready to take greater responsibility and to do greater role in shaping the existing international order, which is in crisis, right? So then what are the key priorities of the South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy? I think that the most important priority and goal under President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy is the bolstering the rules-based international order, right? If you look at the public speeches and official announcements, the remarks made by President Yoon for the last 1.5 years since he took office is that he made repeatedly emphasize that he's opposed to any kind of unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force, whether it is Taiwan Strait, whether it is Ukraine, or whether it is South China Sea. So in that regard, I think taking more proactive stance and joint forces with other like-minded countries in maintaining and in bolstering rules-based international order is the most important priority under this new strategy. In that regard, the forging stronger ties and cooperation with like-minded countries is one of the most important tasks. So in that regard, I think we, as we can see from the Camp David trilateral summit, right? After the bilateral rapprochement with Japan, right? President Yoon has managed to establish a new trilateral framework of cooperation, which includes not only security cooperation, which includes the strengthened extended deterrence against North Korea, but also this new trilateral framework includes almost everything from the supply chain issues, climate change, and the advanced technology, and things like that. And another thing is that, well, if you look at his predecessors, President Moon's initiative, which is New Southern Policy, which has been primarily focused on Southeast Asia and India, right? South Korea used to focus just on the economic and functional cooperation issues. We were not so enthusiastic about taking more proactive stance in regional issues of strategy, security, and the strategic issues, right? But under this new Indo-Pacific strategy, we are very much keen in contributing more to the issues of regional security, including South China Sea issues, regional and the maritime security areas. And also another areas of priority under this new strategy is taking greater role of contributing to the international challenges. If you look at the budget size of Korea's ODA, Official Development Cooperation budget, right? It is about $3.4 billion this year. The projected budget size of the Korea's ODA budget next year is $6 billion. This is the huge increase of the more than 43%, right? So with this increased ODA budget, we are willing to expand our engagement with development cooperation with developing countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Now let me turn to what Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy is not. I think one of the most common misunderstanding about President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy is that this is a balancing strategy against China. So Yoon is blindly following U.S. and Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy, and Yoon joined the Yoon took side with U.S. in its campaign to contain China. Well, in my understanding, this is not true. I mean, President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy is not China balancing strategy. I don't think we are in a position to openly balance China. Of course, there are some elements of soft balancing against China, right? But I don't think South Korea is in a position in military sense, in economic sense, in geopolitical sense, to pursue a openly hostile policy against China. That is against our interest, right? Of course, I mean, but that does not necessarily mean that Yoon is willing to do whatever Xi Jinping asks us to do, which is not possible, right? I mean, there are clear differences in terms of the strategic orientation, the economic interest between China and South Korea. What China considers as its core interest is not really compatible with our core interest, right? In that regard, we have some very determined and very kind of the strong stance about China. But that does not mean that Yoon's stance and his Indo-Pacific strategy is kind of a China balancing strategy, right? If you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy document of South Korea, right, China is described as a key partner. There is no strong language about China, which is quite different from the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy document or Japan's document, right? So this reflects the kind of the strategic sensitivities and complexities we have vis-a-vis China, right? We are sharing maritime and land border. North Korea shares land border with China. We are very close, right next to China, right? So we are not in a position to do the openly hostile policy for China. So in that regard, I think the maximum we hope for is to get along with China, with China's respect. And yeah.
Okay.
All right. So,
sorry to interrupt you. We will come back to you. I need to interrupt you here. I hate to do this, but you're already 40, 50 minutes. So we'll come back to you. If you can hold the last two or three thoughts to yourself, and we'll get back to you. Apologies for interrupting.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much for your intervention for now. We got some applause from the audience. And we're moving on to Francesca, without further ado. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Axel. And please allow me to express my deep gratitude to Consul Kang and the fantastic team at the Consulate in Milan. In my remarks, I will be trying to look at the rapprochement between North Korea and Russia and how we should factor these converging interests in the broader picture of the security framework in the Korean Peninsula, in Northeast Asia, and beyond. So in the first panel, we heard a lot about the domestic drivers behind North Korea's regime military stance, but we also heard about the lack of interest from the US side. But these domestic drivers cannot be separated from one of the most interesting and, as Antonio was mentioning, worrying developments, concerning developments that we have observed in the last 18 months, which is the increasing external support that is flowing to Pyongyang from Moscow in particular, and to a more tacit extent, Beijing. So in spring 2022, so last year, for the first time since 2006, so when the architecture of the international sanctioning from the UN Security Council actually began to target North Korea's military program. For the first time last year, Russia and China vetoed a US drafted resolution condemning North Korea's ballistic program. Another very important development regarding these countries is the fact that this year, in July, we saw two delegations, one from Russia and one from China, taking part in the celebrations in Pyongyang for the 70th anniversary of the signing of the armistice of the Korean War. And we saw Defense Minister Shoigu and the Chinese delegation both attending the parade, so the military parade in Pyongyang alongside Kim Jong-un. And during that parade, for the first time, foreign dignitaries, foreign officials saw strategic weapons being exhibited and passing through Pyongyang. So let's focus a bit on that parade and the strategic weapons that were on display, but more specifically, the fact that since 2021, we have seen North Korea unveiling new capabilities. For example, successfully testing new solid fuel engines, launching missiles from a train, from an underwater lake. And these developments actually should be linked to a very specific and important development which actually took place a month before in January 2021 when at the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party, the leader of North Korea actually unveiled a sort of wish list, as many observers have called it. It's new, is a 5-year plan for the development of weapons and defense systems, so a new 5-year plan for defense. And it is a wish list because it enlisted the kind of milestones that by 2026 North Korean scientists and the army should achieve. And that speech was one of the most, I think, the most detailed speech concerning the capabilities of North Korea in terms of nuclear deterrence ever unveiled, ever pronounced by a North Korean leader. Going back to July 2023, on the eve of the parade, Shoigu was accompanied by Kim Jong-un himself to Pyongyang's Defense Expo. And the fact that Shoigu visited the Defense Expo fueled suspicions, as you might have read, that North Korea and Russia had signed an agreement for the supply of material. And a few weeks later, we saw the US Department for Treasury announcing that it had sanctioned 3 entities for facilitating arms sales between Pyongyang and Moscow. But again, the most important development that took place was in September. In September this year, Kim Jong-un visited Russia's Far East. It took a 9-day trip, so a quite long trip, for the first time since the start of the pandemic. And for the first time, for his first foreign trip, he chose Russia, and he chose to meet Vladimir Putin. So during this 9-day trip, he met with various people from the regime, but of course the culmination was the meeting with Putin and at the Cosmodrome. So again, a location that fueled speculations about what kind of cooperation we might see between Russia and North Korea in the coming month, especially journalists attending this meeting asked Putin about Russia's willingness to support North Korea's space program, and Putin responded affirmatively. So what are the main takeaways from this meeting? So this meeting, I think, did not represent anything unexpected, not an unexpected development, but it rather confirms the sort of converging interest behind this rapprochement between Pyongyang and Moscow that has been accelerated in the aftermath of the war of aggression against Ukraine. Kim Jong-un has been one of the few leaders who have consistently backed Putin's war by promising political support, tactical support, but also this meeting and the summit, the promises, the agreements that might have been agreed on have perhaps offered North Korea the opportunity to continue boosting its arsenal of WMD for the time being. North Korea might have gained an easier access to Russia's raw material and satellite technology. And another thing that we should not forget is that we are talking about two bordering countries that can trade among each other through maritime routes, railroads, and if an external force might try to block these, it could provoke an escalation of tensions. And these facts should influence and should be taken into consideration and should inevitably affect the kind of policy approach that the US and its allies in the region want to pursue towards North Korea. And again, as I was saying, for the first time outside North Korea, Kim chose to meet with Putin, although and not Xi Jinping, although China is formally the sole ally of North Korea. And what does this mean? I think that this doesn't necessarily mean that there might be increased animosity, displeasure from the Chinese side towards Pyongyang. However, it may indicate that in these moments, Moscow is in a position, unlike Beijing, and is willing to give Kim Jong-un the capabilities that the regimes aspires to acquire. In the meantime, I think that overall the position of the Chinese leadership has not changed. The priority remains that of stability in the area, and for Beijing, this historically has meant two things: preventing the North Korean regime from causing a sudden deterioration of the security scenario on the Korean Peninsula and, of course, in Northeast Asia. And at the same time, this has always meant preventing the economic situation in North Korea and the sanctions from pushing the country to brink of collapse. Just to conclude, I think that amid this kind of rapprochement, entente that we've been observing, I think that transactionality and pragmatic considerations have more meaning rather than an ideological leaning towards each other. Of course, both leaders, Putin and Kim Jong-un, have their interests in terms of domestic and foreign concerns to portray each other as the fighters of the US-led international order based on international law. But again, I think that many observers have talked about the emergence of these new authoritarian axis, but I think that at the end of the day, opportunism and transactionality are what emerge most forcefully from these developments in this bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Yep, this is also, of course, very, very interesting. It sounds very dangerous. It sounds very preoccupying. But I think we'll put this also on the table later on. Yes, potentially, very close defense links, and and Russia has been buying ammunition from North Korea on a large scale for its campaign or for its aggression war in Ukraine. But then, it's Russia. Russia is, I think, in terms of military power and of influence, on its way, towards complete isolation and on its way out. So, how sustainable, could be such a an increased cooperation be between one already rogue nation and the other one on its way to becoming a rogue nation. So yes, it sounds dangerous. Yes, they have both nuclear weapons, but is that going to be sustainable in the long run? Maybe that Francesca will come back to this later. And Névine, last but not least, the floor is finally yours. 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And let me first also start by thanking ISPI and the Korean Consulate for the invitation. It's really always a pleasure to discuss the Korean Peninsula, and it's a timely occasion, of course, as well. So given I work on nuclear issues, I'll pick up on quite a few of the themes that Francesca put out there and focus my remarks on the implications of North Korea's renewed cooperation with Russia and China for its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. So the framing of this session, new old friends, is quite apt, I would say. So I'll start by giving a very brief context of how the DPRK's relationships with both Russia and previously the Soviet Union and China played a role in the development of its nuclear program and also the limits there, so the old part. I think it's also helpful to put in perspective the cautionary note that Francesca mentioned of reading too much into this axis of authoritarian states. Then I will briefly discuss on the current developments and how these relations can impact North Korea's current capabilities, and then very briefly in a third part, what this means in terms of constraining North Korea's nuclear program. And you'll note I did not use the term denuclearization. So first, a very brief, quick look back, and I apologize for the historians out there as well. It's a very brief one. But since its founding, North Korea has very consistently balanced its relationships with both China and the Soviet Union, then Russia, cooperating more closely with one or the other at times, depending on particular events, leadership, and political figures, the state of the relationship between the Soviet Union and China, and also between both the Soviet Union and China and the United States, respectively. But North Korea has always been very careful never to entirely antagonize one or the other, while at the same time pushing very strongly for self-reliance. And these dynamics are also very much reflected in its development of its nuclear and missile programs, whereby it switched constantly from requesting support from one or the other, depending on the state of relations, sometimes at the same time as well. On the nuclear front, North Korea significantly benefited from Soviet support at the very early stages in the field of civil nuclear energy, so notably through training and education programs, and also through the procurement of the IRT 2000 2-megawatt experimental reactor. Further cooperation more in the 70s and 80s, the Soviet Union was already getting quite suspicious and careful, and was making this cooperation contingent on North Korea joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And even after North Korea joined, any further deals for instance, nuclear power plants did not really materialize. And despite Kim Il-sung asking Mao Zedong for nuclear assistance many, many times, China did not really provide such assistance. In the 60s, China's nuclear program was also still very much in its infancy, and Beijing really feared also that North Korea with nuclear weapons would potentially lead to another war on the peninsula, one they would get dragged into. Again, this was only a decade and a bit after the end of the Korean War. The DPRK's program eventually really became an indigenous one. North Korea benefited from both licit and illicit technology transfers. And this also was reflected, I think, in the 90s, 2000s, when it took full advantage of the Pakistani-led AQ Khan network in particular. For missiles, we also have a bit of a pattern where North Korea benefited from early transfers from the Soviet Union, but not in terms of ballistic missiles, more in surface-to-air missiles, artillery rockets, and again, that's training, testing, and maintaining these systems. But when it comes to the ballistic missile program, North Korea did not procure those directly from the Soviet Union, but through Egypt, Romania, Syria. But the core of its ballistic missile capability is very much based on these Soviet systems. With China, there was a tiny bit of cooperation, but very limited. It sort of petered out. So overall, historically, North Korea benefited from some assistance from the Soviet Union on the nuclear side, from both the Soviet Union and China on the missile side, but both programs really took off with domestic investments, indigenous developments, and access to other types of tech transfers. This brings me to that second part today. In the last couple of decades, we've not really had any open support for North Korea's nuclear and missile developments from Russia or China. They're both nuclear weapon states. It's just in the NPT, members of the Security Council, it's just generally not been in their interest to go beyond what the North Koreans were already doing themselves. Also given that once a particular technology reaches North Korea, the likelihood of that going beyond the North Korean borders was quite clear as well when it comes to missiles. For Russia, though, that calculus does change a little bit now. Its extended war in Ukraine changes, I think, some of the short and midterm objectives. So Russia does gain by propping up a nuclear North Korea, encouraging further displays of North Korea's nuclear strength serve as a bit of a distraction from its war in Ukraine. The thinking maybe a few steps beyond would be that more stronger nuclear North Korea would require then stronger displays of assurance on the US side for the US's allies in the region, which would potentially take that away from the US allies in Europe. It's a stretch. But as mentioned by Francesca, the extent of the cooperation that we've seen in these last few months developing with Russia is still a bit uncertain, and I think the most likely area has been for space assets. The last, I think it was yesterday, the successful launch of North Korea's satellite could have potentially benefited from some then early advice from Russia, but I think more of that support would be in the coming months, years, because obviously North Korea's ambitions in space are not about one satellite, but about a constellation, and there it really could benefit from Russian support. I think there's been a bit of speculation on what this would mean in the nuclear realm, how much Russia would be willing to and able to support North Korea there. One that's been cited a lot in media is access to naval nuclear propulsion technology. I would say that's quite a step, and I think at the moment the price for that is one that the North Koreans are not able to pay, and Russia wouldn't really part with that kind of technology cheaply, again, knowing it would probably then be sold onwards elsewhere. I think for other nuclear elements, the eminent nuclear expert Siegfried Hecker, who's been to North Korea, visited nuclear facilities, mentioned a very long list of things that the North Koreans could benefit from the Russians, like when it comes to just direct supplies of plutonium, highly enriched uranium, tritium, all of which Russia has quantities of, or support with particular reactors or design information. There's, again, a long list, but the extent to which Russia would really take that step, like clandestinely perhaps, but there's also still an element of protectiveness around its own nuclear program and data there. I think there's still also an interest in having the flawed Security Council system work to its advantage with Russia being there. So let's just put it in the sense that Russia is not perhaps yet that desperate. For China in all of this, I would say, despite it having a no-limits partnership with Russia, I think the consensus is that it's unlikely to be very happy about this very close relationship emerging. It means that both Russia and North Korea are slightly less reliant on China, makes them a bit too confident perhaps, also more prone to escalation, which China definitely wouldn't want. I think with North Korea being able to develop stronger, better nuclear missile capabilities, this has an influence, obviously, on the South, and also an influence on how South Korea, Japan are beefing up their own conventional deterrent capabilities, solidifying their alliance with the United States. Again, this is not in China's interest. So out of the three, China, Russia, North Korea, China is still, I think, the one that's most invested in its international reputation and relations with the West on a number of issues, and becoming more and more pressured to then influence the behavior of either Russia or North Korea on any number of issues, including nuclear, is just not what it wants to be doing. I think there's just limits to this new trilateral security axis. I think Francesca mentioned quite a few, and at the moment for Russia, munitions, sure, this is very useful, but it's also not a game changer in the war, and it's just going to be very careful in the future what it chooses to trade away to North Korea. Relationship, I would agree with Francesca, remains very transactional, based on partially shared interests, which are currently aligning, particularly between North Korea and Russia, but the historical background is not one that is forgotten either, and there's also that risk of, with any extra support of it being dragged into a war that's just not very likely. Do I have another minute? Yeah, of course. Another minute? No, perfect. This brings me then to what does this mean then in terms of being able to put some constraints on North Korea's nuclear program? I think even in the last few years after the failure of negotiations in Hanoi, we've already seen a big shift in North Korea's thinking and approach towards nuclear weapons. It's really not looking at normalizing relationships with the United States as much, so not really putting up its nuclear deterrent up for negotiations as much. I think this has been clear in some of the documents that and speeches that Francesca mentioned, but generally the shift has been just becoming more and more concrete. Closer alignment with Russia and China in the short to medium term does mean that no significant action can be taken at the Security Council level, so no new sanctions, resumption of exports and aid, and just a lack of compliance with these sanctions is just going to be more feasible. So the approach to how we think about limiting North Korea's nuclear arsenal really does need a rethink. Denuclearization, I would agree also with the previous panel, is not what should be the first and foremost priority. I think in the nuclear realm, we're obviously talking about bigger risks with North Korea that is more capable, although controversially having space capabilities maybe would reduce those risks a little bit, controversially. But generally the emphasis, I think, in the community, and I think Professor Lee mentioned this as well from his visits in the States, is looking at arms control, but for those of us who think a bit more in disarmament, arms control terms, the first step has been risk reduction on that agenda, and I think that's where some of those conversations are likely to continue, and I'll end it here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. Very insightful also. And of course, we might, and Névine pointed this out, of course, we must not forget that the sanction regime, or the sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council onto North Korea, were violated by Russia and China from day one onward. So they never really worked because China and Russia openly, sometimes more, sometimes less openly violated those sanctions as well. The other thing I would like to put on the table, and here I'm a little bit on thin water, but maybe we can talk about this all the same. I've been speaking to a couple of German military officers a week ago in Berlin at another Korea conference, and they said, well, we might be joking about North Korea selling or giving ammunition to Russia, and Russia must be very different. It must be very desperate, and it's a joke. It's not a game changer. But they were saying to me, and I would throw this back to you maybe. They were saying, well, don't laugh about this. The sort of ammunition that the North Korea is giving to Russia is not necessarily a fundamental game changer on the battlefield, but it's nonetheless important, okay? Because the ammunition is available, and it does indeed provide Russia with badly needed ammunition, which it has been running out. So North Korea is a bit of a loose cannon, but also becoming quite clearly a participant of the conflict. Okay, now we got 10 minutes. Shall we do it the way we did it before? I give the floor again to you, hoping that there's more than one question this time. And there is. Antonio already, and then we have a second question also. Antonio, the floor is yours, briefly. And also, yes, number 3. We got 3 questions. Giovanni also. Okay, yes. Very briefly, Antonio.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Actually, I have a question for Professor Choe. What he was saying is absolutely agreeable. When he actually talks about the fact that actually South Korea is not on the same page with the United States or Japan, actually I do agree on that, and the fact that actually South Korea has different interests. On these actually, I just completed a paper, and I had basically the same vision, but my Korean co-author actually, warned me by saying, oh, no, actually, UN administration nowadays is, tangibly, visibly, actually, tilting towards the United States. My question is actually, how do you see the future of South Korea's positioning? Because it depends on different things, actually, on different factors. One is who's going to be the next American president, and actually, you know, what is going the next American president to ask to South Korea, or you know, things like actually be more on that side, or explicitly actually aligning with some of the platforms that actually we have seen appearing, like, you know, the Quadrilateral Alliance, for example. And how about the future of Yoon's administration? I mean, do you think that actually what's actually is going to be the future alignment of South Korea with this administration, under this administration? What about the next one? Actually, do you think that in the future South Korea might depend more on the United States on these, and so of course actually there will be some kind of counterbalancing China operations?
Okay, can you please address that question very briefly also? Sorry about the rush, but if you can reply that, and then we move on with the questions. Yes, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. First about China, if you look at the Yoon government's movement after the trilateral summit at Camp David, right? The next issue is the another trilateral with China and Japan. And actually, next week, Wongi, the Chinese foreign minister, is visiting Busan to meet with his counterparts from Seoul and Tokyo. So in that regard, I think one of the underlying ideas behind all of this in Yoon government is that in order to have constructive, cooperative relations with China, you need to have the stable framework with the U.S. based on the bilateral alliance, right? So when you have better ties with the U.S., when you strengthen your relations with the U.S., you have a better advantage to deal with China, which would help you to make the bilateral relations move forward. Well, I don't know what will happen if Trump administration, Trump is taking another office in the election next year. But I think from the structural perspective, right, there might be some shifts of the American policy toward South Korea, for example. I mean, the Trump administration, another Trump administration will ask more burden sharing from South Korea for the American forces, and you know that Trump is more transactional, right? And also another issue is the U.S. policy vis-a-vis North Korea. You know that the one of the main priorities for Yoon in dealing with the Biden administration is to make a strong deterrence capability against North Korea, which is the extended deterrence, right? So we have established the new nuclear consultation group. But you know what? I mean, the domestic response to this new kind of the arrangement for strengthened, corroborated, extended deterrence is very mixed, right? I mean, there are very serious concern about the long-term viability, the long-term credibility of this new extended deterrence arrangement by U.S. I mean, so still we have a lot of strong voices domestically that we should go eventually nuclear. I think this is one of the issues. I mean, this issue will not go away in South Korean debate. And also, you have to consider the strong domestic polarization in domestic politics between the left and the right? I mean, the opposition party and the majority, the majority opposition party has very radically different ideas of what would be the desirable foreign policy with China, to U.S., and also with North Korea. The solution to North Korean nuclear problems is radically different, right? And we have the general election coming April next year. So unless Yoon is able to garner some considerable votes in the coming general election, I think Yoon might end up with the early lame duck president. So sustainability of the current administration's policy stance vis-a-vis Japan, China, and U.S. and even North Korea, right, are very much at stake.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Fiori. The gentleman in the third row, and then also Guido. Okay, please be brief, a little bit briefer than your predecessor, please. Okay.
Of course. Thanks to the panel for the excellent discussions. I just wanted to ask on the flip side of things in relation to arms control. So South Korea is increasingly becoming an arms exporter on the kind of global stage as well. I wonder what implications there were given North Korea's arms exports to Russia, what sort of South Korea's arms exports globally also has in terms of security on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Okay, right. Shall we take another question, and then we throw it back to the panelists? Guido, over to you. Got the last question for now. Yeah, doing okay. We got 8 to 9 minutes all in all. Then we're gonna switch off the lights. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. So you were discussing about the authoritarian axis, which so far would theoretically comprise only North Korea and Russia. But of course, China is the obvious candidate. And given this framing and the rhetoric that has come from the Kim visit to Russia, it was, of course, really anti-imperialist, anti-US. And China, I think, doesn't really want to be seen to be too closely aligned with that. But of course, that's a possibility. And so which one would you think are the conditions under which China might consider to getting closer to this axis? Thank you.
Okay. Névine, you want to address the questions first, and then we end with Francesca? Yeah, pick whatever you want to pick. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much for excellent questions. Regarding South Korea as an arms exporter, I think some of the readings I've seen is regarding Kim's visit to Russia and particularly some of the deals related to munitions, but also space that would be out there. One interpretation has been that it was as a warning signal to the South as well. How credible that is, how, again, twisted of an interpretation that is, I'm not sure, but it's definitely on the radar that the Yoon administration was considering, for instance, exports to Ukraine as well. So it plays into a much bigger game. When it comes to arms control, actually, I would maybe put the focus on proliferation. What we have seen is with the US further and further trying to support its allies by also not applying perhaps the same types of proliferation standards that they would have done in the past. So South Korea is very much the clearest case there, where it's reduced limits on missile technology, for instance, that's accessible. Also, we're seeing this now with Australia, so there's definitely a trend towards further enabling allies at perhaps the expense of non-proliferation in that regard. I don't know if this answers your question fully. And on conditions for China to see itself aligned. So China is very much against this idea of bloc politics. And so I think at the moment when talking about this authoritarian axis, a lot of Western media does put China in the same bag, talks about China, Russia, and North Korea all together. I think we've made it, or I, at least in my remarks, have tried to distinguish that a little bit. I think the conditions would really involve China fully giving up on taking any type of global leadership role, or really willing to be ready to sacrifice some of its other relationships. I'm not a China expert on these issues per se, but I see China as still wanting to limit and to keep a certain healthy distance there.
Absolutely. Francesca, last word.
Yeah. Thank you. So I will try to tackle the question regarding the defense exports, because it's something that I've worked on for the past few years. And I totally agree with Névine that the issue of this growing presence and this growing importance of South Korea's exports and role in the defense procurement that we've seen in the last few years. Now South Korea is the 8th largest exporter of arms, but the Yoon Suk-yeol administration aims to reach the fourth place. I think this is very, very hard to achieve, considering the conditions that stand. But I agree with Névine that these developments should be put in a broader framework, so not only as a reaction to what happens in North Korea. These are, for example, the fruits from a series of defense reforms that actually were put in place around 2005 by the Nominal administration to modernize the defense sector, also in view of the demographic changes which have become more and more stringent nowadays in South Korea. And nowadays, especially, we saw the increasing interest from NATO towards Japan, South Korea, the partners, the like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific. I think that for this sector and the opportunities that and the strategic opportunities that South Korea could provide to other countries has been perceived as a way to portray South Korea as a credible partner, especially a credible partner in security beyond its neighboring region. So again, we go back to the global pivotal states. As Dr. Choe was mentioning, Yoon, in his, for example, last year in the first speech as president at the UN General Assembly, he was the first Korean president who avoided any reference to North Korea during his speech. And so South Korea has been trying to present itself as something else, and not only the other Korea, which has an existential threat in the north, and especially a credible player when it comes to security dynamics, not only pertaining to the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia, but a credible and useful player also for European partners.
Okay, Francesca, thank you very much. And also maybe, Dr. Choe, if you want to have the last word, we have some time. If there's anything left you want to address that was addressed to you directly or indirectly, the floor will be yours if you want to. No problem.
Yeah, well, I think I like to talk about just one point. I mean, yeah, as the other speakers mentioned, I mean, North Korea is an existential threat, but we have many other more challenges, and that's one of the main reasons that with this new foreign policy initiative, we try to expand the reach of our diplomatic horizon. In that regard, I mean, the cooperation with NATO is very important, and also the collaboration with European partner countries like Italy is also very important in terms of the substantiating our diplomatic outreach. And also the North Korean problem should not be just considered as inter-Korean issue, right? As you other speakers already rightly pointed out, and Russia, China, and many other countries also involved. And I think the overall strategic environment for dealing with the North Korean nuclear threat is not really favorable. So in that regard, I think South Korean government put priority on the international collaboration and cooperation to deal with the North Korean nuclear challenge. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choe. So thank you again. Before we close, just remind you, for those who have signed up for the closed door meeting, it's taking place at 12:30 next door. So we'll all take a little break, and then those who sign up go to are free to go to the closed door session. Thank you to all of you. from afar and from right next to me. I think it's very, very useful. I think we put a lot of issues and questions onto the agenda. Very, very useful and fruitful dialogue between scholars, friends, and like-minded scholars in democratic countries. And I think this is something we should not forget. The only point is then maybe also what Dr. Choe, maybe if I may have the last word. You talk about South Korea being the world's among the top 10 economies in the world. And the question also would then be, which you are not going to answer now, how South Korea could further use its economic leverage in the future, to nonetheless, despite all the difficulties, not to contain, but to engage North Korea. It has been tried before, with a lot of efforts, and North Korea did what it did over the years. So South Korea has really, nothing to be ashamed of. But the stronger South Korea becomes economically and prosperous, maybe. And that's really trying to finish on a positive note. Maybe this message will also arrive in North Korea at some point, that economic benefits could be just around the corner. Okay, and I think this is really a nice note to end here. We take a short break, and please join me in applauding our speakers and our panelists for the contribution. Thank you very much.